I remember the first time I heard about it, though it wasn't like I stumbled across it in a normal way. Most people talk about their childhood cartoons with fondness, a sort of warm, fuzzy nostalgia that drifts back with a Saturday morning cereal bowl in hand. But this was different. They called it the Lost Episode, though few actually knew its title, and even fewer had seen it. The rumors had been scattered, whispered across forums, buried in old VHS listings, and tucked into the margins of fan blogs that were long forgotten. People said it had scared kids for decades. They didn't just mean made them jump or a little unsettling, they meant that those who watched it could never forget it, and some of them never spoke about it again. I had always thought that was just exaggeration, one of those internet urban legends, until I found myself staring at a grainy file name on an old torrent list late one sleepless night. My curiosity was immediate and irrational. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't help it, and so I clicked. It's strange how something as simple as a cartoon can feel sinister. Normally, cartoons are safe. They live in a world that obeys rules that are forgiving, predictable, and colorful. Smiles are permanent. Conflicts are temporary. Every episode ends cleanly, the world restored to cheerful balance. But this episode, from the very first frame, that balance was gone. It started innocuously enough. I recognized the opening theme, slightly warped, but familiar. The characters I had loved as a kid were there, moving through their tiny world like they always did. But there was something off, imperceptible at first, a subtle hesitation in their movements, a shadow in the corner of a brightly lit room, a fleeting expression on a character's face that didn't belong to them. And then came the sound, a static undertone, barely audible, hidden beneath the cheerful music, like someone whispering from just beyond the screen. Before I go any further, I should explain the show itself. To most it was harmless entertainment. Bright colors, catchy songs, harmless misadventures. Kids adored it, parents tolerated it, and nobody thought twice. But anyone who spent too much time analyzing the animation, the production notes, or even the background details would notice minor oddities. One animator mentioned on a now-deleted forum that certain sequences felt wrong, as if they had been altered after filming. Others speculated that the original storyboards contained frames that were never meant for public viewing. I never gave those rumors much weight at the time, chalking them up to bored artists with too much time online. But now, looking back, every detail mattered. Every little wrong thing I had dismissed as coincidence suddenly seemed like a warning. I'd ignored that finding the episode itself was its own twisted journey. I had been chasing leads for weeks, scouring old message boards and obscure video archives. People posted fragments, screenshots that were distorted, blurry VHS captures of just a few seconds, and cryptic notes claiming that the full version was somewhere in the depths of the internet, behind passwords, hidden in archives, or in private collections that would never be shared. I remember one forum post in particular. A user who called themselves Shadow Animator 1997 said simply, "Once you see it, you'll understand why it vanished." No context, no explanation, just that line. It was the kind of message that makes your stomach tighten, your curiosity and fear colliding at once. I chased that lead, and eventually, in a digital corner of a dead forum, I found a link to a file labeled only as lost_final.ep. The file size was tiny, barely enough for a proper episode. That should have been my first warning when I opened it. The screen flickered like an old TV powering on, and I could feel my pulse quicken, an almost primal anticipation that something irreversible was about to unfold. It began normally. Characters appeared in their bright, cheerful world. But then, subtly, everything shifted. The lighting grew uneven. Shadows crept into corners where they didn't belong. Faces seemed to stretch for a split second, just long enough for your mind to register wrong before the scene moved on. I couldn't tear my eyes away, even as an instinctive part of my brain screamed that I should stop. The dialogue was even stranger. Lines the characters would never say were whispered almost too quickly to catch. The words themselves weren't overtly threatening, but the way they were delivered, the tone, the pauses, the unnatural emphasis made my skin crawl. One character, normally cheerful and goofy, muttered a phrase that made no sense. "They are watching, always watching." I replayed it several times, convinced I had misheard. But no, it was there, faint, distorted, layered beneath the soundtrack in a way that no one would notice on casual viewing. There were moments in the animation itself that seemed impossible. A scene showing a playground briefly flickered to something that looked like a completely different drawing. Jagged lines, blackened figures with no clear form, faces that contorted in impossible ways. It lasted only a fraction of a second, yet it felt like the universe had skipped a beat. I later learned this was called a subliminal frame, a trick animators sometimes use, but the way it was done here wasn't playful, it was deliberate, malevolent almost. My rational mind tried to dismiss it. It's just a glitch, an artifact of an old video transfer. But my gut said otherwise. I reached out online, carefully, cautiously, to ask if anyone else had seen it. Most responses were vague, cryptic, or outright frightening. One user replied with a single line, "You shouldn't have." Another simply said, "It follows you." And there were posts that disappeared before I could even read them fully, accounts deleted, threads removed. The internet, which normally feels permanent, felt volatile and fleeting, like a warning I wasn't supposed to decipher. I began to understand that this wasn't just a cartoon. It was a trap, a carefully constructed enigma designed to unsettle, to linger, to invade, even after watching it. I couldn't forget the way it made me feel. There's a difference between fear you can laugh off and fear that burrows under your skin. I experienced both. The cheerful facade of the cartoon made the horrific elements even more unbearable because the contrast forced my brain to reconcile two realities. The world I remembered and the world this episode presented. Every colorful background became suspect. Every innocent character could be hiding a secret, waiting for a moment to reveal it. My childhood innocence, something I had thought untouchable, felt violated in the most subtle way imaginable. I started noticing strange things in my own environment afterward. The shadows that seemed to linger too long, sounds that didn't belong. Sometimes, at the edge of my vision, I could swear a figure moved like one of the distorted characters. Just a second too fast, just out of place. It was as though the episode had bled into my reality, leaving behind residue, a reminder that what you see even in something as innocent as a cartoon can sometimes be more real than you want it to be. What strikes me the most, thinking back, is the way people avoided discussing it. Friends, former viewers, even strangers on forums would quickly change the subject. Their eyes flicking away, their hands fidgeting. It was as if acknowledging it gave it power, and none of them were willing to risk that. That's when the full weight of the FOMO hit me. This was something forbidden, something that existed on the edge of knowledge. And because it was forbidden, because it had the power to unsettle so thoroughly it compelled you to search for it. Everyone wants to know, everyone wants to see it, and everyone who does pays a price, whether they realize it or not. I keep the file hidden now, stored away on a drive that rarely leaves my possession. I've considered deleting it, erasing it from existence entirely, but curiosity is insidious. Part of me wonders what it truly is, what secrets the creators embedded that even I haven't discovered. Rumors persist that fragments exist in animation archives, hidden in reels that were never digitized, left in storage closets of defunct studios. Some say the creators themselves feared it, that they never intended anyone to see the final cut, and that's why it vanished. Others whispered darker ideas, that the episode was designed to hunt, to follow, to make the watcher complicit in its horror. I don't know which is true, and part of me fears finding out. Even writing this now, describing what I've seen and felt, I feel that subtle dread creeping back. It's as though putting these memories into words might somehow awaken it again, or at least make it tangible for someone else. The thought that someone reading this might go searching for it, might find it and experience the same creeping terror fills me with both dread and a strange sense of guilty responsibility. I have to warn you, curiosity comes at a cost, and some things, once seen, can never be unseen. I remember pressing play, heart hammering, my hands trembling slightly, and the screen flickered with that strange, almost imperceptible distortion that felt like it was waiting for me. The opening sequence ran as expected at first, with the familiar theme song and the bright, cheerful colors that had defined the show for years. But there was something wrong. The colors weren't quite right. The blues were too sharp, the yellows almost sickly. The characters moved as if underwater, their limbs stretching too long, faces twisting ever so slightly in a way that made me question my memory. At first I thought it was a glitch, some artifact of the old file I had downloaded. But as the episode continued, I realized this wasn't a technical error. This was intentional. The first scene took place in the usual living room, but the furniture seemed skewed, impossibly angled, casting shadows that didn't align with the light source. The characters' dialogue was off. They spoke like themselves at first, in those familiar, friendly tones, but the words started to slip, misplaced syllables, odd pauses, undercurrents of something menacing. One character, normally the happy-go-lucky lead, turned toward the camera, and his eyes, they weren't right. They flickered, darkened, then widened unnaturally, almost as if he was seeing me directly, even through the screen. I froze, the kind of frozen that claws at your chest, and the whispering started low, almost beneath the soundtrack, like someone speaking in a language I didn't know, repeating, "Don't leave, don't leave, don't leave." Then came the playground scene, which should have been innocent. The children ran around, the sun shone, everything appeared normal. And then, just for a split second, a shadow passed across the frame, a tall, distorted figure that didn't belong, with two long limbs and a face that seemed to melt before my eyes. It was gone in an instant, but the fleeting glimpse left me paralyzed. I rewound it, slowed it down, stared frame by frame. Each frame seemed more grotesque than the last, as if the animators had embedded something they didn't want anyone to see. My stomach churned. I wanted to look away, to close the file, to stop the madness, but I couldn't. Something about the episode had a gravitational pull, a force that demanded I continue watching. The dialogue became harder to pass. Lines that should have been cheerful and simple turned into cryptic warnings. "They see everything," one character whispered as they ran across the playground. Another added, "Even when you're safe, they are here." I paused, replayed it. No, I wasn't imagining it. There was a layer beneath the animation, subtle enough to almost miss, but insidious in its effect. My rational mind screamed that this couldn't be real, that these were mistakes, coincidence, but my gut knew better. Someone, or something, had deliberately crafted these moments to disturb, to unsettle, to burrow under your skin in a way that normal horror never could. It wasn't just visuals or dialogue. The sound design was wrong in a way that is impossible to explain. Background music shifted subtly, tempo slowing, pitch bending, just enough to induce tension I couldn't shake. Sometimes I thought I heard laughter, distorted and unnatural, echoing behind the normal soundtrack. Other times, a faint scream threaded itself under a song, barely perceptible, like a secret layer designed to be felt more than heard. I paused, listening with headphones, heart racing. It was real. It had to be real. The scene that followed was worse. Inside the house, the lead character walked down the hallway toward the bathroom. The hallway elongated unnaturally, stretching into darkness. The wallpaper pattern seemed to shift, forming shapes, faces, eyes, gaping mouths. I leaned forward, squinting, suddenly aware that every innocent detail I once trusted in cartoons could be weaponized against the mind. And then came the figure, standing in the doorway, just for a second, a silhouette unlike anything in the show. Its proportions were all wrong, too tall, limbs spindly, head cocked at an unnatural angle. I blinked, and it was gone, but the image burned itself into my memory. I remember that moment vividly, a strange combination of fascination and terror. My brain wanted to reject what I saw, to call it a hallucination or a file corruption, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. This episode was alive in a way that no cartoon ever should be. And then there was the dialogue. One character, whispering directly to the screen, said something I couldn't immediately comprehend. It was garbled at first, but as I listened carefully, I realized it was my name, my own name, whispered in a way that made my blood run cold. I hit pause, rewound. Nothing but the sense of being addressed, of being seen, lingered in a way I can't describe. The next sequence took place outdoors, in the park. The children were playing, laughing, swinging on the swings, or at least, that's what it looked like. Their faces flickered, morphing into grotesque masks for a fraction of a second. Impossible to see clearly without pausing frame by frame. The cheerful theme song slowed in pitch, the melody bending into something almost mournful. I tried to remind myself that I was imagining it, that stress and my own expectations were distorting reality. But then the screen darkened suddenly, as if someone had reached out and twisted it, and in that darkness, 2 words appeared in red: "Don't watch." My hands shook, my vision blurred, and yet, I pressed play again. That it escalated further. The episode's ending should have been simple. The characters returning home, hugging, the sun setting, the usual happy resolution. Instead, the final scene showed them frozen, facing the camera, their expressions no longer friendly or exaggerated, but horrifyingly blank. The background twisted, a spiraling pattern of darkness and light, as if reality itself were bending around them. The shadows from earlier pooled, forming shapes that looked almost humanoid but wrong in ways I can't articulate. The whispers returned, louder, more urgent. They see. They always see. There was one moment I can never forget. A character, standing alone, lifted a hand in what should have been a wave, but the hand elongated unnaturally, stretching toward the camera, toward me. The face contorted, the eyes hollow, a silent scream forming on lips that weren't theirs. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I watched in frozen horror as the hand seemed to reach into my room, as if the barrier between the screen and reality had been breached. I wanted to close the file, throw the computer across the room, do anything, but I was paralyzed, trapped in a mixture of fascination and terror that defies description. Even after the episode ended, if you could call it that, the horror didn't stop. Frames flickered, not part of the episode itself, but leftover residuals that seemed to haunt the video file. Shapes lingered in the corners of my vision. Faces appeared for a split second only to vanish when I blinked. My reflection in the monitor looked slightly different, distorted in ways that echoed the episode's own horrors. For weeks I felt like I was being watched. Sometimes, in my sleep, I'd hear the whispers again, faint but insistent, as if the episode had left a mark on me, a shadow in my mind that could not be erased. I reached out online again, this time with desperation, looking for anyone who could corroborate what I saw. A few users responded, cautiously, as if afraid of summoning something by typing about it. "I've seen it too," one wrote. "Never speak of it." Another warned, "The more you discuss it, the closer it gets." I didn't understand what they meant at first, but later, alone in my room, I realized the warnings weren't metaphorical. Something about this lost episode had a presence, and acknowledging it, watching it, discussing it, invited it into your life. I couldn't shake the feeling that the episode had been designed to manipulate not just emotions, but perception itself, to leave an imprint that lingered beyond the screen. And yet, even knowing the danger, even understanding the unnatural quality of what I had seen, part of me craved more. I began combing through old archives, seeking fragments, deleted frames, anything that could give me insight into what the creators were doing, what they had intended. I found traces, blurred, corrupted, half-erased frames and forgotten videos. Little anomalies in promotional material, hints of subliminal warnings. Every discovery increased both fascination and dread. Every fragment suggested that the horror extended beyond the episode into the world surrounding it. The more I looked, the more I understood. This wasn't a simple piece of media. It was a puzzle, a trap, and a message encoded in animation and sound. I also started noticing my own behavior changing. I would hesitate before watching normal cartoons, expecting to see something wrong, something hidden. Colors seemed sharper, shadows too deep. Random noises, faint, imperceptible at first, made me jump because they reminded me of the whispers from the lost episode. And the most terrifying part, I began to suspect that it wasn't all in my head. There were patterns, subtle movements, coincidences that felt like the episode's influence extending into my reality. The idea that a childhood cartoon, could reach beyond its medium to leave a lingering presence was not something I ever wanted to contemplate, yet there it was. By the time I finally shut my computer and tried to sleep, the last scene haunted me. The frozen characters, the twisted backgrounds, the whispers. I could replay it in my mind involuntarily, as though the episode had implanted itself in my memory with a purpose. I knew then that I would never experience cartoons the same way again. That warm nostalgia, the comfort of childhood animation, it had been irrevocably tainted. And every time I think about telling someone else, about showing a friend, about revealing the secret of the lost episode, a part of me hesitates, because part of me knows what the others online had already warned. Once you see it, once you spread it, it doesn't stop. It follows. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the episode. Even days later, it lingered in my mind like smoke from a fire I couldn't locate. I began noticing stories online, whispers and threads that hinted at its legacy. Parents spoke in hushed tones about children who refused to watch cartoons again, who would wake in the middle of the night screaming, or who drew impossible figures in crayon and then refused to explain them. Adults remembered fragments, little moments they had blocked out. Yet the terror had persisted, shaping how they saw animation, reality, and sometimes even their own memories. It was more than a show, it had become folklore, a legend of fear that no one could fully describe without risking the curse of its detail. Some researchers of urban legends and media phenomena theorized about it, though the conversation was mostly underground. A few wrote essays claiming subliminal coding had been inserted intentionally, a layer of hypnotic suggestion buried in the animation's frames. Others whispered about mimetic viruses, the idea that a medium could carry not just a story, but an emotional contagion, infecting the psyche of anyone who watched it carefully. Forums would pop up and disappear, each promising insight into the lost episode. Yet most dissolved under mysterious circumstances, users banned, threads erased, accounts deleted without warning. I began to realize that the more one tried to investigate, the more the episode itself seemed to resist discovery, as if it had its own will. And then there were the encounters. At first, they were subtle. I would see fleeting shadows in the corner of my room, or hear what sounded like whispers just beyond comprehension. Sometimes it was a sound I could feel in my chest, rather than hear, like a vibration that resonated with the memory of that final scene. One night I was scrolling through an old forum discussing lost media when I noticed a notification, a message from a user with no posts, no history. They're closer than you think. My hands went numb. My computer flickered. When I looked back, the message was gone. I knew I hadn't imagined it because the timestamp matched the exact moment I had been typing. That the effect on my mind grew more insidious. I would dream about the episode, not in fragments but in continuous loops. I saw the characters frozen, stretched, whispering my name. I woke up drenched in sweat, convinced for a moment that I had returned to my own childhood living room, only to find subtle distortions, a shadow that didn't belong, a reflection that moved slightly differently from me. Rational thought told me it was stress, a side effect of obsession, but another part of me knew better. Something had followed me out of that file, something that refused to remain confined to the screen. Curiosity and dread became intertwined. I wanted answers, to understand who made the episode and why. I scoured old production notes, archived interviews, and forum posts. One former animator, now long retired, claimed in an obscure interview that the episode had been experimental, a project to test psychological boundaries in children's media. He spoke hesitantly, like saying too much might summon consequences. Others hinted at darker forces, something beyond human comprehension, though no one dared say it aloud. Pieces of a puzzle formed, but every answer only created more questions. Was this merely a human trick, or was it something alive, embedded in celluloid and pixels, waiting to reach through? Even normal life started feeling unreal. Watching other cartoons became unbearable. Colors seemed off, movement too perfect, music too cheerful, like a mask hiding some underlying truth I was no longer able to ignore. Shadows became heavier, familiar spaces suddenly alien. I noticed friends occasionally glance at me strangely, as if they could see the lingering effect the episode had left on me. I began hearing faint laughter at impossible times, always just beyond hearing, always whispering, always reminding me that what I had witnessed was not over. and the more I resisted, the more it pressed against me, insistent, patient, and knowing. I started to compile my own notes, by screenshots and observations, in part as a warning, in part as a desperate attempt to make sense of what I'd seen. I even made diagrams mapping frame distortions and audio anomalies. Some nights I imagined the figures moving within the diagrams themselves, rearranging into forms that whispered things I couldn't fully comprehend. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was a psychological reaction, but the episode had a way of warping perception that no rational explanation could encompass. And the fear wasn't just of what I had seen, it was of what I might see next, in a dream, in a reflection, in some place I didn't yet recognize as connected to it. Friends tried to intervene, though most didn't know what to make of my obsession. One asked hesitantly, "Why don't you just delete it? Stop looking." I wanted to explain, but how could I? It wasn't just a file. Deleting it wouldn't erase what it had already done, and the compulsion to know, to understand, to see further, was overwhelming. There was always a hint, always a trace, that there was more, something deeper hidden in plain sight. And so, I continued. I traced every distorted frame, every whispered line, every anomaly in the audio, desperate for a pattern, desperate for a sense of control. The culmination of this obsession was inevitable. One night I found myself staring at my computer, ready to play the episode once more, unable to resist. I braced myself for the horror, but also for revelation. The final scene unfolded exactly as before, the frozen characters, the twisting shadows, the whispered warnings, but this time, I noticed subtle details I hadn't before. Small symbols embedded in the background, almost imperceptible, repeated like a mantra. The figures seemed to move slightly in the corner of my eye, reacting to my gaze, acknowledging me in ways that felt impossibly intelligent for a cartoon. I felt a presence behind me, as if the episode itself had manifested in my room. My pulse accelerated. The whispers grew urgent, and then, for a moment, I thought I saw the hand, stretched impossibly long, reaching toward me. It stopped. The screen went black. Silence. And yet, the oppressive feeling remained. The room felt smaller, heavier. I realized then that the horror wasn't just on the screen. The episode had become a lens through which I experienced the world, a filter that made me notice things I never had before, distortions hidden in everyday life. Even the people around me seemed subtly altered, faces occasionally twisting just out of normal perception, voices carrying inflections that didn't belong. The episode had taught me a lesson I could never unlearn. Reality is malleable, perception is fragile, and some media carries more than story, it carries intent, influence, and memory embedded deep in the psyche. I wrote about these experiences not only as confession but as warning. This lost episode is more than a forgotten piece of animation. It is a trap, a lure for curiosity, a test of endurance and sanity. People will seek it out, drawn by whispers, rumors, and the thrill of forbidden knowledge. If you encounter it, if curiosity drags you to its pixels, know this: it will not leave you unchanged. Shadows will linger in familiar spaces. Whispers will haunt your dreams. And the episode itself, it will watch, patient, waiting for the moment when fear becomes fascination, when dread becomes obsession. Sometimes I think about the children who first saw it, their innocence violated in the most subtle, incomprehensible way. I think about the adults who remembered it, carrying fragments of horror hidden in memory for decades. And I think about the internet, the forums, the deleted threads, the vanished accounts, all attempting to hold in check something that refuses to be forgotten. The episode is alive in a way that defies explanation, and the longer you dwell on it, the more it grows in your mind. There is no true end to this story, only cycles of curiosity, exposure, and memory that ripple outward, affecting everyone who stumbles across it. I keep the file hidden now, a secret I guard with a strange mixture of fear and obligation. I tell this story to you because, in some sense, it's safer if the knowledge is shared cautiously, slowly, in words rather than visuals. But part of me fears that speaking of it, even in text, is another invitation. The episode exists not only as animation, but as an idea, a presence, a test. And I warn you now, should you decide to seek it out, should you follow curiosity past the edge of comfort, remember that once you see it, it may never stop watching. And still, even now, I sometimes think I hear a faint melody in the corner of my room, familiar and cheerful, warped in ways my mind shouldn't comprehend. I feel the shadows lengthen, see glimpses of impossible forms at the edge of my vision, and I know, deep down, that some things are better left unseen, some knowledge better left unsearched. Curiosity is a dangerous gift, and some cartoons, some lost episodes, are designed to remind you why. So if you take one thing away from this, let it be this: the lost episode exists. It is real, and it does not forgive curiosity. And somewhere, in the flickering pixels of a corrupted video file, the figures are waiting for the next viewer to stare too long, to lean too close, to whisper their own name aloud, and invite the horror in. You have been warned.